welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are discussing on feminist methodology. Now, as already stated earlier, we are referring to a syllabus of sociology honors research, sociological research method, and we are using an article to understand feminist research methods. In this lecture, we are looking at Hammersley article, Feminist Methodology. Before we start to understand, we know how feminist methodology started or evolved, and this was in terms of also connected to the women's movement, and it kind of affected the way in which social sciences were studying the society and the social order, and there was an understanding that there was a neglect of the women or gender in social science. Most of the understanding of marriage, family, kinship and other institution was from a male perspective. So for the feminists, gender became an essential social category, and they started with the objective of exploring society from a gender perspective. In this article on feminist methodology, Hammersley emphasizes that method here is understood in the broadest sense. This means it encompasses more than just data collection techniques like qualitative versus quantitative. It includes the underlying principle guiding how research should be conducted. The belief about what constitutes knowledge, how it can be acquired, and what counts as truth. So, in this article, Hammersley focuses on 4 core themes. The first is role of gender as an analytical category. 2. The validity of personal experience. 3. The nature of the researched relationship. And 4th, the emancipatory goals of research. So, it is not just about kind of trying to understand the steps of doing research or how you do research, but also kind of talking about the research relationship, what should be the objective, should it be in terms of construction of knowledge or it should be in terms of providing solution to mainly the women who are central in the feminist methodology. So, kind of try to understand the objective of the article or why the author intends to write and what is the objective behind the research. Hammersley states her intention to access these wide sets of ideas, and the strategy for doing so is to systematically examine each of the 4 themes that have been previously identified as making the distinctiveness of feminist methodology. The main objective is to critically evaluate the argument for a distinct feminist methodology. So, the idea was to understand is there a need for a feminist methodology, and if it is, then how unique or distinctive is this methodology from other social science conventional methodology. So, let us look into how Hammersley kind of does a critical evaluation of the 4 core themes of feminist methodology. Before feminism, gender was largely overlooked in social science research and compared to variables like class and ethnicity. This neglect manifested in 3 ways. Number 1, limited research on gender differences. The experiences and perspective of women and girls were largely ignored. So, if I give you an example, if say Malinowski studied the Islanders, where he was studying the Kula exchange, and here he completely kind of neglected the role of women in the economic activity. Rather, he said that if you studied men, you have kind of covered women as well. So, now the same society was studied by feminist scholar, and their finding was that in the same society, women played a significant role in the Kula exchange. So, why do you need a feminist research methodology? Because there was kind of a limited research on the gender perspective, or looking into society from the gender dimension. So, the second was the reason for a feminist methodology in terms of understanding the significance of gender is the underplayed significance as an extraneous variable. Gender influence on various topics was not adequately considered. Third, absence of awareness of gender effect on the research process itself. The idea that a researcher's gender or gendered assumption could influence the research was almost entirely absent. However, if you kind of look into the way in which gender relations are structured, the identity of the researcher can make a lot of difference. This heightened attention to gender in all three aspects as an extremely valuable product of feminism, calling the previous neglect astonishing and deplorable. Despite acknowledging gender's importance, the author challenges the idea that gender should be given preeminent or unique importance over all other variables. So, what is the counter argument or critique? So, on one side, the feminists are considering gender as the core category to be explored. Hamel says that it is not necessarily to overemphasize gender, and it kind of could be understood as other categories are also there. So, he argues in many investigations, other variables like class, race, etc., are likely to be at least as important as gender. This point has been strongly made by black feminists LaRue, Carby, Lugons and Spellman, Stanley and Weiss. These are names of some of the feminist scholars. Their work often highlights how focusing solely on gender can obscure the unique experience of women of color, where race and class intersect with gender to create distinct forms of oppression. Some post-structuralist feminists argue for a plurality of differences where gender loses its singular position of significance. This stems from concerns about essentializing definition of womanhood, meaning defining women in a way that erases the diversity of women's experience based on race, class, sexuality, etc. The author suggests that privileging gender significance can stripe away other aspects of the context of the phenomena studied, leading to an incomplete understanding. So, that is why that if the after gender study, we now see there is a lot of focus on not just only studying the gender or the womanhood, but also the interconnection. So, intersectionality has become more significant. You need to not only study gender, but also to the class that the women belongs, to the race, to her color, to ethnicity. So, all these kind of cut across. You cannot have a holistic study by just kind of looking at gender, which is one dimension of along with the other dimensions. The second was in terms of whether there is a requirement of documenting personal experience, or we need to kind of become more objective and more scientific and not overemphasize the experiences of women. Hamel points out that appealing to direct experience over method is not unique to feminism. It is a common theme in qualitative methodology discussion. So, whether you are kind of doing the studying the gender or you are studying any other dimension in qualitative research, the the focus or the emphasis is in terms of documenting everyday life. So, even if you kind of look into the symbolic interactionist perspective, it is kind of looking into everyday performance of your behavior in terms of you interact in the way in which you kind of portray yourself as in relations to the Eid or in terms of building your personality. Hamel concedes it can be useful for emphasizing careful observation and listening to others' account. The core argument is that all experience is a human construction. The idea of seeing what is there unmediated is a false construct. What we perceive is always a complex product of our physiology, our culture, and the external reality. The author acknowledges that the feminist qualitative emphasis on experience can be useful specifically in highlighting the importance of number one, careful and sustained observation, listening to the accounts of others. To be truly effective, this emphasis needs to be reformulated. Instead of claiming direct access to truth, it should focus on using methods that minimize the chance of false cultural assumption being embedded in the data. Hamilton advocates for a balanced approach. We should emphasize neither method nor experience, but rather seek to correct experience by use of method and method by the use of experience. So, you cannot just kind of look into personal experience, so then it becomes a more of a kind of journalist investigation or kind of a storytelling. To make it as scientific research, it has to kind of bring in a method and look into the experience, but also retain the objectivity of doing the scientific research. And therefore, the method is about making research process explicit and public. This transparency allows for a collective assessment and improvement of research strategies. By openly discussing and reflecting on the method used, researchers can tentatively conclude which strategies are more appropriate for specific purposes and circumstances. The idea that women have uniquely valid insight is characteristic of feminist standpoint epistemology. The author draws parallel to similar argument. Number one, black essentialism. The claim that only a black person can truly understand the other black people. Marxist proletarian consciousness. The idea that proletarian consciousness offers the truth about capitalism due to the proletariat oppressed position. And the third example, parallel, is Nazi science. Stark, that is John Stark, claim that only Aryan ancestry grants access to authentic scientific knowledge, dismissing relatively as Jewish science. So, what the author wants to say is that it's not only in feminist methodology that the oppressor's own experience is being captured, it's kind of found in other similar approaches or perspectives as well. So, the author acknowledges that individual is different social locations will have different experiences and cultural assumptions, and this diversity is extremely fruitful for inquiry. It can lead to novel theoretical ideas and generate criticism of existing the new ideas. However, we must beware of claims that one group or category of people necessarily has more valid insight than other. Since all experience is a construction, it always carries the capacity for error as well as for truth. Even seemingly direct experiences like pain are product of sensory apparatus affected by physiology, personal experience, cultural conditioning and social context. The argument that oppressed groups, that is women, have unique insight into oppressive motive is not very convincing. It's two-edged. Oppressor presumably know their own motive, and for their oppressions to be successful, they must understand the oppressed. There is no clear bias for a claim to superior insight here. The third core argument or the core theme in feminist methodology is reciprocal researcher-research relationship and the rejection of hierarchy. Hamilton points out that many ideas concerning non-hierarchical collaborative research and the explicit declaration of researchers' value are not distinctive to feminism. having precedent in non-feminist ethnography, action research and other fields. He challenges the feminist argument for eliminating hierarchy based on ethical, methodological and tactical grounds. The ethical argument, that is women studying women as equal, is flawed because feminists also study up powerful men, and women's and men's lives are inextricably linked. Methodological claim: the hierarchical data is distorted, rest on a restrictive view of social science. So, the feminists are arguing that if you maintain a hierarchy between the researcher and the research, then the data is actually distorted because there is a kind of a power relation between the two, and the respondent may or may not kind of give authentic answer. Hamel says that this is kind of a flawed assumption. Data isn't just informant account, and even accounts are subject to error and require critical examination. So, the researcher doesn't only depends on one individual or so it kind of is a number of time you have to cross check the data that has been arrived. So, the chances of data distortion is there even when you are using scientific methods. So, that does not kind of justify the rejection of hierarchy. He rejects the idea of an ideal or authentic situation for error-free data. So, in social science, to claim that your data is error-free is kind of not acceptable. There will be some amount of error because the respondent themselves are human being, and the focus is on everyday experience, emotions, values, which are themselves subjective. So, the idea of an error-free data is not actually acceptable. A proper researcher-research relationship depends on specific investigation, and that advocating for non-hierarchy rests on questionable assumptions about authority and equality, neglecting practical complexities. The author notes extensive discussion within ethnography methodology about the varied roles of participant, observer and interview. The primary concern has often been to avoid disturbing the research subject, but ethnographers have also been aware of ethical issues and obligations to those studies. Few qualitative or ethnographic researchers would argue for a researcher acting as a neutral and uninvolved observer. While they might not advocate for an active intervention or commitment to a specific group, the idea of a complete detachment is already rejected in these fields. The notion that a researcher's own value should be made explicit is also found in non-feminist literature. For example, if we read Max Weber or Midrell, they also have kind of a rejection of the hierarchical relations. Advocacy and practice of collaborative research involving the people studied in the research process has emerged in various other fields, where when we kind of give example of more non-hierarchical research, it's not so specific or distinctively used by feminist methodology. It's used by many of the development organizations, research institutions, especially research on education and development in the third world. So, there is kind of Hamel also points out to the women only assumption that if it's a gender sensitive problem or the researcher is studying the gender issue, then it's only to be studied by women. He points out an obvious problem. The assumption relies on the idea that only feminists can study women. Some feminists advocate for studying up, that is researching powerful individual, which inevitably means studying men. And here the focus should be that it's a gender study, so it's not only kind of documenting the lived experience of women, but also documenting the lives of the men as such. So, the assumption is also here problematic. So, the third was the argument against hierarchy. The data is observational and people do not just what they tell the researcher, but it also depends on the overall. The fourth was emancipation as goal of and criteria. Hamilsey argues against both immediate goal of changing the world and judge researching primarily. So, it is not kind of possible to change the world through your research. So, if we go to the overall understanding of Hamilsey's article, he acknowledges that feminism has made and continues to make a major contribution to social science. This is an important concession showing that a critique is not a dismissal of feminist overall value. Feminist methodology is yet another instance of an attempt to set up a separate methodological paradigm based on distinctive political philosophical assumption that homogenize other research and other view. While feminism has undeniably enriched social science, the attempt to carve out a wholly distinct feminist methodology is problematic. The creation of a distinct methodological paradigm can lead to balkanization of social science, where different camps also stop engaging with each other. Many of its tenets are not unique, some are unconvincing, and the very act of creating such a separate paradigm risks intellectual isolation, dogmatism, and hinders broader productive debate within social science. So, to get a clear idea of the feminist methodology, it is suggested that you read the article by Hamilsey on feminist methodology. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.